Hi, I'm Travis, and this is the TM Podcast. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the murder of Marilyn Sheppard. This is an unsolved case from the 50s where they thought her husband, Samuel Sheppard, had killed her, but he was eventually cleared and released from prison. And in my opinion, this is one of the best examples of how media coverage can influence the outcome and perception of trials or events. This is something that we still see today, and it's one of the major reasons that I personally don't watch the news for anything other than the weather. Do you remember a time you could turn your TV on and get completely unbiased stories about major events or crimes? Me neither. So, Samuel Sheppard was born December 29th, 1923 in Cleveland, Ohio. He was known to be an excellent student and athlete, and he was even the class president at Cleveland Heights High School for 3 years. This would be where he met Marilyn, his future wife, while still enrolled in high school. Sam's brother Steve introduced him and they hit it off pretty much immediately. She was thin, hazel-eyed, with brown, long hair, and she was a year older than Sam. When she graduated, she went off to college in New York while Sam finished high school. Sam was voted most likely to succeed and had several options for colleges, and instead of going off to college for athletics, he decided that he would follow the path of his dad, who was already a doctor, and go to school for osteopathic studies in Indiana. While they were still in college, they stayed in contact, and sometime in 1943, he sent her his fraternity pin that indicated to her that they were engaged to be married. That can either be like really sweet or really lame, depending on how she reacted to it. But apparently she loved it because when Sam transferred to Los Angeles Osteopathic School of Physicians, they maintained their long-distance relationship. In September of 1945, he asked her to come to California to stay with him, and when she got there, they got married at the First Hollywood Methodist Church. They rented an apartment, and Marilyn found a job as a secretary. They tried to have a child pretty much immediately, but her first pregnancy ended in a miscarriage. They tried again, and Sam Reese Sheppard was born in early 1947, but they just called him Chip. Once he graduated and completed his internship, Sam became a resident in neurosurgery at Los Angeles County Hospital. In 1951, Sam moved his family back to Ohio to join his father's hospital. For a while, they rented out an apartment, but Sam's dad actually loaned him some money and he used it to buy a 4-bedroom, 2-story Dutch colonial house that sat on top of a cliff right above the Lake Erie shore. So their life was pretty cookie cutter for a doctor's family in the 50s. They enjoyed skiing on the lake, golf, bowling, playing basketball with neighborhood kids, parties with friends, picnics, everything. Sam even built a little clubhouse under his garage for the kids in the neighborhood that had like weights, ping pong tables, and stuff in it. So everyone liked him, of course, but they weren't perfect. There was no evidence to ever support that Sam was ever violent towards Marilyn, but it is known that he cheated on her with someone that he worked with. She had known about it, and they had been attempting to revitalize their marriage right before her death. She had actually gotten pregnant again during this time. On July 3rd, 1954, Sam and Marilyn had invited their neighbors over for a small Independence Day party. They watched the movie Strange Holiday as pregnant Marilyn sat on Sam's lap. He ended up falling asleep on a daybed in the living room, and Marilyn let the neighbors out and put their son to bed. This was the last time anyone would see Marilyn Sheppard alive. Sam alleges that at some time in the early morning of July 4th, 1954, he woke up to Marilyn screaming his name. He ran up the stairs to the bedroom and saw, quote, a bushy-haired man standing next to her. He fought with the man, but he was knocked unconscious by a blow to the back of the neck. When he woke up, Marilyn was dead on the bed. He ran to check on his son, who was asleep in his bed and unharmed. When he ran down the stairs for the phone, he saw the man running out of the door towards the lake. He chased him down and lunged at him, but was again knocked unconscious. He came to on the shore of Lake Erie, missing his t-shirt and his watch. He ran back into the house and called the mayor, his friend, Spencer Hook. He told Spencer over the phone, quote, my God, get over here quick. I think they've killed Marilyn. He then called the police. At 6 a.m., Officer Fred Drinkan arrived at the Sheppard home. He found Marilyn laying face up in the bed with her face turned toward the door. Her shirt had been pulled up to expose her breast, and her pajama pants had been removed from one leg, exposing her pubic area. Her legs had been pulled under the wooden bar at the foot of the bed, and her face had been badly beaten. There were over 20 curved gashes in her face and in her head, and the room and her body was completely covered in blood. The autopsy determined that her time of death was around 4:30 a.m., and it also revealed that she was 4 months pregnant with a baby boy. There was evidence of a robbery, or at least a staged one, in the home, as there were drawers that were pulled out, bags flipped over, but nothing notable was missing. Their neighbor, friend, and NFL quarterback at the time, Otto Graham, of the Cleveland Browns, actually saw the crime scene and said, quote, "Oh my God, it looks like someone stood in the middle of a room with a can of paint and flicked it all around. Whoever did this had to be out of their mind." I'm not sure why he was even allowed in there, but I thought it was interesting, and later you'll see why that's important. Suspicion of Sam being the murderer rose pretty quickly, as his account of what happened seemed completely unbelievable. When he was interrogated, he denied having any involvement in her death or knowing anything else other than what he'd said. They found out pretty quickly about Sam's affair with the person that he worked with. The person was Sue Hayes, and she confirmed to police that their relationship had turned sexual, and Sam often brought her gifts and had sex with her in his car or their apartment. Sam said that they were nothing more than friends when the police asked him though, so that obviously didn't help. Media attention to the case happened almost immediately. Not unlike today with any high-profile case, especially ones with wealthy families, rumors and speculation took over. The press painted Sam as the killer from the start with no evidence to back up their initial claims other than the fact that he was present during the murder. Here are a few headlines from the Cleveland press during the time of the investigations. One said, quote, "Dr. Sam Sheppard denies lie detector test for questioning in the slaying of his attractive wife." And one that was in all caps that said, "Why no inquest? Do it now, Dr. Gerber," referring to the coroner who they thought should publicly question Sam. In response to the media attention, Gerber, the coroner, actually scheduled the inquest for the very next day after that headline at Bay Village School Gymnasium. The gym was completely packed with people who came to watch this questioning. Sam showed up, still wearing a neck brace from his injuries. Attendees say that Sam seemed a little too detached and unnaturally calm during the entire event. When he was asked publicly about the affair that he was having, Sam responded, "Absolutely not." I actually have a picture of him being questioned in front of all these people that I'll put up. In the days following the inquest, the headline, "Quit Stalling, Bring Him In," ran in the Cleveland Press papers. The article stated that Dr. Sheppard should be brought in for more intense questioning as they felt that the coroner didn't grill him hard enough. And I guess the police were just reading the newspapers instead of actually investigating, because at 10:30 that evening, they arrested Sam and interrogated him for 22 straight hours. He stuck to his story and denied any involvement with anything to do with the murder. On August 16th, a grand jury met to discuss all the evidence that they had against him, to include statements from friends, family, and Sue Hayes, the mistress. The day after Sam was released on a $50,000 bail, he was arrested for the murder of Marilyn Sheppard. The trial started on October 18th, 1954, with Judge Edward Blythen. Reporters and people were all over this case as it was the definition of scandalous. It had murder, sex, mystery, money, and secrets. The judge denied any motion to move the case outside of Cleveland because of all the media attention. Usually in cases like this, they'll move them away from where it actually happened for the safety of everybody involved. The press had already painted Sam as a lying, cheating murderer before the trial even started. The jury was already aware of the allegations, all but one even admitting to seeing or reading about it in the papers. The Cleveland paper even posted their photos and names, which is completely ridiculous. If you don't know, you're supposed to be removed from the jury if you have any previous knowledge or bias of the case. The paper running their names and photos did nothing but really put them in a bad situation where they're probably now afraid to make the wrong call because of mob mentality guided by this reckless-ass newspaper. The prosecution went just as you would expect. It was presented that they believed that the murder weapon had to be a medical instrument, as no murder weapon was found. They had no real evidence of it rather than a vague bloodstain left on a pillowcase underneath Marilyn's head. The defense argued that it could have been anything due to the overlap of the pillows, and that it wasn't fair just to speculate that it was a medical object with no basis. The judge allowed the accusation and even allowed for the pillowcase to be passed around to the jury. They also stated that the blood on Sam's watch, which was later found in a bag close to the house, was from him beating her, but the defense argued that he was wearing it while checking her pulse before the second attack. They displayed the full color images of Marilyn's body in the courtroom and did not allow Sam to leave. He turned his back as to not see the images and closed his eyes. If Sam really wasn't guilty, this is a really fucked up scenario. Not only did you just lose your wife, but now you're forced to see her nude body displayed like some object in front of all these people. Susan Hayes, the mistress, was brought to the stand to describe the affair that she had with him. Her presence was geared towards the theory that his motive was to start a new life with Susan and he had to get his wife out of the way. Any motions for acquittal during the trial were denied immediately by the judge. The defense used a witness testimony from the hospital on the night that Sam arrived to prove that his injuries that he received couldn't be faked or self-inflicted. They had hoped to help the jury understand that he was not the real killer, but the opposition stated that the injuries could have been caused by Marilyn in her fight to survive. The jury seemed skeptical as Sam took the stand to defend his own story. He told them his relationship, though not perfect, was never bad. He always felt that him and Marilyn were on the same side with most things and he would never hurt her. His answers were always very vague about the intruder himself, though. He attributed his thoughts to not being clear to the head injury that he received during the attack. When he was asked, "Is it a fact that you murdered your wife?" he said, "No, sir." When he was asked, "After you killed your wife, didn't you run outside and injure yourself by falling down the steps or jumping off of the platform of the beach house?" he replied, "That is absolutely untrue, sir, and I think it is very unfair." In the closing arguments, the assistant prosecutor, Tom Perino, asked, "How could a man in the prime of his life be put down with a single blow? Twice. Why are there no signs of a struggle? Where was his shirt?" His list of questions seemed to move the jury towards a guilty verdict. In the defense's closing statements, they brought up the weakness of the evidence, stating, quote, 5.5 months since the murder, the state still doesn't know how the crime was committed, with what weapon, or why, and concluded by saying, quote, "You have the opportunity to turn back the tide, to tell the people of the nation, or of the world, that the constitutional right to a fair trial still lives." It wasn't enough, though, as the return verdict read, quote, "We find the defendant not guilty of murder in the first degree, but guilty of murder in the second degree." Judge Blythen sentenced him to life with the eligibility of parole in 10 years. In the months after the guilty verdict, Sam's mother committed suicide and his father died of cancer. Also, the Cleveland Press editor, Louis Seltzer, published an autobiography to highlight his role in bringing Sheppard to justice with his trashy headlines and unresearched articles. Wow. One positive development after the trial was that Dr. Paul Kirk, a criminalist from California, concluded that the murderer had to have been left-handed. This was due to the direction and force of all the wounds. He also concluded that the murder weapon was probably a flashlight and the murderer was probably someone who hated the Sheppards. Even though everyone seemed to like them, it's not much of a stretch to think that someone hated them for being so successful or felt wrong by their existence. Envy is a very dangerous motivator sometimes. He even stated that there was unidentified blood found in the room of the murder that didn't belong to Sam or Marilyn. A swimmer who lived next to the Sheppards actually found a flashlight in the water right near their home 3 months after Dr. Kirk's report was published. In 1959, Sam got an even bigger break when Richard Eberling was arrested for larceny. Richard used to wash the Sheppards' windows right around the time of the murder. When police searched his home after his arrest, they actually found a lot of stolen items to include a ring that was owned by Marilyn Sheppard. In questioning, the officers took a shot in the dark and asked why they found his blood inside of the Sheppard home, which they hadn't. Instead of denying the claim, he shocked the investigators by saying he accidentally cut himself replacing some old windows for the Sheppards and must have dripped blood throughout the house. Unfortunately, they could not test or compare his blood to the other blood that was found. This is in part due to the lack of DNA testing equipment at this time. In 1963, Sam got a new lawyer who immediately filed for a new trial under the grounds that he didn't receive a fair trial the first time because of the bias, among other things. During this time in prison, Sam had already found him a new German woman. Her name was Ariane Tebenjohans. She had been writing him from Germany and actually traveled to the US to see him a few times. It seems strange, but we all know that for whatever reason, pen pals and love interests with prisoners is not a new concept. I will never understand how or why that happens. What makes you want to fall in love with someone who allegedly killed the last person that they loved? Mid-July 1964, federal judge Carl Weinman overturned Sam's conviction and stated that the previous trial was, quote, a mockery of justice, and cited several key pieces of evidence that were never presented, as well as the, quote, trial by newspaper given from the press at the time. Sam was released on a $10,000 bond and immediately married his new German lover. In 1966, in an 8-1 vote, the Supreme Court officially reversed his conviction on the grounds that he had an impartial jury and didn't receive a fair trial. They would announce immediately after this that they would be giving him a new trial. The second trial began on October 24th, 1966, in the courtroom of Judge Francis Talty. He made sure that the, quote, carnival atmosphere of the first trial would not be tolerated. This trial would go a lot smoother for Sam, and some of the previous allegations were completely thrown out. The surgical instrument theory was abandoned due to lack of evidence. Susan Hayes wasn't even asked to come back to testify, and Sam's marital affair wasn't dug into other than just rereading his initial denial statement for the jury to have the context. The prosecution did argue that Mary's blood on Sam's watch could have only came from spatter, implying that he murdered her with the watch on, but the defense brought a forensic expert to dispel the claim, stating that it was from contact transfer, backing up Sam's original statement. Dr. Kirk took the stand to present his evidence of the killer being left-handed as well as the blood in the room that was not Marilyn or Sam's. He included Sam's clothes as evidence. If he had been the killer, he would have had more than just a few contact stains on his pants. Remember that future Hall of Famer Otto Graham saying, "Looked like someone threw paint everywhere." So Sam would have had some evidence of that on him as well, not just one spot on the pants. They did find a shirt close to the house a few days later, but it wasn't determined to be Sam's, and it also didn't have any blood on it. The defense did not suggest that Richard Eberling was the killer, as he had passed a lie detector test, and Sam said that he wasn't the man that he saw that night. I think that's just a little crazy because, first of all, as I've said before and will probably say a million other times, lie detectors are bullshit. He could have easily fooled that, and also, Sam admitted that everything was a little hazy after he was knocked out twice, so it's weird to me that he just dismissed Richard completely. They did, however, suggest that Esther Hook, the wife of the mayor Sam called that night, was possibly the killer. They think that Marilyn may have been having an affair with Spencer, and she discovered this and was driven to murder. Unfortunately, there was no real evidence of Spencer and Marilyn being anything other than friends, but I could say that really about anyone that I know, and I could be wrong. People keep secrets. Suspiciously enough, Esther Hook had started a coal fire in her fireplace of the morning of the murder. The National Weather Service provided evidence that the temperature bottomed out at 69 degrees Fahrenheit that night. In the closing statements, the defense stated, "The real killer isn't in this room. Someone was angry, very angry. Someone who didn't have the strength of Sam Sheppard, as he would have crushed her skull like an eggshell." They also said, "Why was that person angry? What happened? What did she do to deserve it? We may never know." The jury voted this time to acquit him of the original verdict, and he was a free man on November 16, 1966. After the trial was over, Sam returned to practicing medicine. He also became an alcoholic. He ended up botching 2 operations which resulted in the death of 2 different patients. He resigned after he was sued for wrongful death by the families of those people. In 1968, his new wife filed for divorce due to his drinking problem as well as threats and infidelity. In 1969, he decided to become a professional wrestler, seemingly out of nowhere. Believe it or not, he used the stage name Killer Sheppard, which seems a little insensitive, but I can't find anywhere as to why he would possibly think that was a good idea. And obviously, his career didn't last very long. He ended up meeting and marrying a 20-year-old named Colleen Strickland during his time as a wrestler. On April 6, 1970, 46-year-old Sam Sheppard collapsed in Colleen's kitchen. Medics on the scene were not able to revive him, and he died before he reached the hospital. His cause of death was initially determined to be liver failure from all the drinking that he did. It was said that he drank at least 2/5 per day, which is 1.5 liters of alcohol. That's crazy. The official cause of death was actually Wernicke's encephalopathy, which are lesions on the brain that's caused by thiamine deficiency. In 1989, police refocused on Richard Eberling. He was convicted of first-degree murder in a completely different case involving a money scheme with an elderly widow. He told various interviewers that he knew more about the Sheppard case, but he never actually admitted guilt. And unfortunately, he died in prison in 1998 before anyone could get any more information out of him. In 1997, Chip Sheppard, Marilyn and Sam's son, filed a civil suit against the county for wrongful imprisonment of his father. A judge ordered that the bodies of Marilyn and Sam be exhumed for a forensic analysis. In the wrongful imprisonment trial, the county argued that Sam was correctly charged initially and presented a new murder weapon theory. They said that a bedside lamp that was missing from the nightstand was actually the weapon, but the only evidence of this was a neighbor stating he had repaired one for them and it just wasn't there. It seems like it's a little far-fetched, but regardless, Chip did not win the wrongful imprisonment case, and still, to this day, no one has been named as the killer for certain. There's still some evidence that points either way for this one, and I'll go over the major ones really quick so you can decide what you think. The evidence that supports Sam being the killer is obviously extensive. One interesting piece of evidence is an autographed copy of Sam's book, Endure and Conquer. He autographed the book for a beauty salon owner, but instead of just signing it on the cover page, he also wrote the word "Yes" underneath the header. The header was a question: did Sam do it? A handwriting expert concluded that this was Sam's handwriting and it wasn't a fake, but why would he randomly admit guilt to a stranger like that? And I find it ironic that this person, Phyllis Moretti, had already considered writing her own book about this case, and I feel like this could just be her drawing attention to herself. I also have a picture of this autograph that I'll post. Another piece of evidence that people use to support Sam being the killer is their dog and son. Their dog didn't bark in the night and their son slept through the entire event. To be fair, my dog doesn't bark at anything or anyone, but the child sleeping through the murder is pretty interesting. If Marilyn screamed loud enough to wake up Sam downstairs, you would think it would have woken him up too, but it doesn't mean that that means anything, it's just interesting. Next is lack of forced entry. There was no evidence of a break-in in the room other than a small tool mark on the basement door. The family that was there the night before doesn't remember if any of the doors were locked or if they locked their door on the way out. Next is that there are only a few items stolen. The drawers that were pulled out in the bedroom were pulled out evenly and had nothing missing from them. This doesn't mean that there wasn't a break-in, it just seems suspicious. Maybe the person didn't have enough time to steal anything because Marilyn woke up and caught them, and after the murder, Sam waking up, they just had to get out of there. Next is infidelity. That one's pretty obvious, but the people that were around the family before this said they seemed very happy and normal now. Remember I said they had tried to revitalize their relationship, and she was pregnant. Next is the bloody watch. They found it in a bag outside of the home, which is suspicious all in itself, but either way, they already dismissed that evidence in court. Next is that missing table lamp. This one was also dismissed, and it's widely accepted that the flashlight that was found in the water was the real murder weapon, but that's something that we'll never be able to find out. The last major piece of evidence that points to Sheppard is that Richard Eberling's blood not being found at the scene. The other blood evidence was so degraded that it couldn't be positively identified to him. That doesn't mean that it wasn't his, as the DNA evidence on the blood testing wasn't up to par with our current methods, and we won't really ever know the answer to that one unless they find a way to retest the graded evidence. There isn't a lack of evidence in the theory of an alternate killer either. One is the one that the defense pushed that implies Esther Hook killed her out of rage about the affair. With almost no evidence other than the furnace thing, it's hard for me to believe that one. If it was true, that would also mean that she knocked out a grown man 2 consecutive times and then sprinted home fast enough for Sam to call her husband for them to come over. Next are the extent of the wounds that he received and experts verifying that he couldn't have done them himself or faked it. Like I said earlier though, Marilyn may have caused those injuries to him while fighting to survive, but I'm not sure that there were any defensive wounds on her that could support that. It's never really talked about in any of the cases. Next is the lack of previous violence. There was no evidence that Sam had ever gotten violent with Marilyn or anyone else, and he had never been known or charged with any form of violent crime before that. The only violent thing outside of the murder accusation was him throwing a glass bottle at his German wife later on in life. Sure, he was a piece of shit for always cheating on apparently everyone he was ever with, but cheating and murder are 2 different tiers of shitty. Next is the blood and DNA evidence. He should have been covered, but as we already know, he only had contact stains and his own blood on him. Also the third-party DNA. Someone else was in that room that bled enough to leave a sizable stain on the closet door. According to DNA expert Dr. Muhammad Tahir, only 1 of 42 people have the same DNA profile consistent with the blood that was found. Richard Eberling is one of those people. Unfortunately, the sample was so degraded that results were not reliable enough for a conviction. Dr. Muhammad also found evidence of semen inside of Marilyn, but it was too small and degraded to be viable evidence or linked to anyone. Next is lack of motive. Even though his marriage was troubled, he seemed to have very little to gain from murdering his wife other than maybe a new start with a lab tech. It doesn't seem like it makes sense at a glance, but to be fair, people have murdered for way less, so you can't really rule that one out. Next is the story itself. The man was a neurosurgeon. You'd think if he was going to make up a story about a robbery gone wrong and stage the scene, he would have come up with a better story than getting knocked out twice and not remembering anything. People do crazy things when they're panicked though, so maybe he did have a better plan, but it fell through at the last minute and he panicked and jumped off the balcony and hurt himself. Who knows? Next is the theory brought up in 2002 in a book called Tailspin. The book claims that James Call, an Air Force deserter, was passing through the area on a multi-state crime spree during the exact time that she was murdered. He could have been the killer. It's speculation though, and the escalation from petty burglary to violent murder seems like a bit of a stretch, but it is interesting that he was passing through right at this exact time. Lastly is Richard Eberling. His other crimes involving deaths of homeowners that he was working around or for seem to make the most sense. Even though he denied involvement during the interrogations, he allegedly confessed to Kathy Wagner, who worked with him in 1983. A fellow convict told police that he had actually confessed to him that he had killed Marilyn and knocked Sam out with a large pail. He also told this convict that, quote, "that bitch bit me." My opinion is that Eberling is the real murderer. His history of violence towards women on top of access to the house makes me think that it has to be him. Could be the reason that he only looked through specific areas of the house to steal things because he already knew where they were. Maybe that's why the dog didn't bark. He knew him. He did have the ring on him still, and I think that maybe that was his trophy. I think that he was jealous of the family and what they had. He had to con people out of money and clean windows for a living, and he has to see these wealthy people every single day. I'm sure it wore on him mentally, and for whatever reason, Marilyn was the focus of his rage that night. He also never provided police with an alibi. He fit the build of what Sam saw minus the hair, but he was actually known to have wigs. Sam not thinking that it was him at the trial could be attributed to him having a concussion and not remembering things fully. I think that he broke in, or maybe even just walked in, stole a few things, sexually assaulted and murdered Marilyn, and then knocked Sam out and fled in a panic. He had motive and access to kill her as he killed the other women that he killed. In prison, he corresponded with Cynthia Cooper and made several weird statements to her to include, quote, "why do women fight back when raped?" and, quote, "she didn't look pregnant," in reference to Marilyn. And I think it's strange that the police didn't pursue the sexual aspect of this crime. Even if Sam did it, I don't think that he would expose her chest and pubic area to the world like that after killing her. And it seems like a huge motive for Eberling. Unfortunately though, unless they find a way to retest evidence or some major piece of evidence falls in their lap, we'll never know what really happened to Marilyn Sheppard. Who do you think did it? What do you think happened? Do you think it was really Sam and he confessed to a random barbershop owner? Or do you think Richard Eberling was actually the murderer and he got away with it? And what do you guys want me to cover next? Let me know on any of the pages for the podcast and I will definitely respond. I love hearing other theories that you find or other perspectives that you put on each of the cases I do. Now, for the Patreon shoutouts. I believe that after this episode, I'm going to make this a higher tier reward on Patreon as it's going to get really hard to keep up really quick. Maybe you guys could let me know what you think the other tiers should be and what they should include. First is Austin. He's been one of the original supporters and I really appreciate you helping the show out, man. Next is Jamie. I actually grew up with him and it's super awesome that he listens and supports the show. Thanks, man. The last one is Leland. To be completely honest, Leland is the last person that I thought would be a fan of true crime podcasts. But I'm super excited that he's out there listening and supporting me. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. Also, special shout out to my cousin JJ for helping me get moved into my house quick enough to be able to keep posting. I'm way too weak and unmotivated to have done this all by myself, so I appreciate you helping me out. As always, if you'd like to become a patron and support the growth of this show, head on over to patreon.com/thetmpodcast and become a supporter. As a side note, I removed the language warning from the start of the episode because all the streaming services now have content warning tags, and that saves some time. The TM Podcast is researched, written, and recorded by myself, and the intro and outro was written by the artist Stress.